Can I sit here until my mom comes? William Carter looked up from his plate. I'm sorry, he said, his tone polite but firm. Why don't you find an empty table and sit there? The girl glanced around the restaurant, then back at him. There aren't any empty tables, sir. They're all full. I just need to wait a little while. When my mom comes back and another table opens, I'll leave. William looked at her slowly. I reserved this table in advance, he said. And I was hoping to enjoy my dinner alone tonight. Yes, sir, the girl said quietly. Before either of them could say more, a server walked over, alerted by the unusual sight of a child standing beside one of the restaurant's most important regular customers. Excuse me, the server said gently to the girl. Sweetheart, you can't stand here. You're disturbing our guests. I'm sorry, the girl said immediately. I'm waiting for my mom. She told me to wait inside. I understand, the server replied, still kind, but now more professional than warm. But you can't wait at this table. This table is reserved. You can stand over there by the wall until your mother comes. That way, this gentleman can enjoy his dinner. The girl looked toward the wall, he pointed to. It was just a narrow space near the coat rack. Not really a place for a child to wait, just a place to be out of the way. Then she looked back at William. My mom had something important to do next door, she said softly. She told me to come inside and wait because it's warm. I won't be long. I'll just sit and wait until she comes and then I'll leave when another table is free. The server turned slightly toward William. I'm sorry about this, sir. We'll take care of it. William didn't answer right away. He looked at the girl again. Really looked this time. Please, sir, she said quietly looking directly at William. Now, can I sit here until my mom comes? I'll be very quiet. You won't even notice me. For a moment, William said nothing. Then he lifted his hand slightly and made a small gesture to the server. I'll handle it, William said calmly. The server hesitated. Sir, are you sure? It's all right, William. You can go back to the floor. The server nodded. Of course, Mr. Carter. He gave the girl a quick curious look, then walked back toward the main dining area. William reached forward and pulled the empty chair across from him out from under the table. Sit down, he said. The girl blinked, surprised. Thank you, sir. She climbed into the chair carefully, placing her canvas bag on her lap and folding her hands over it like she had been taught to sit properly at someone else's table. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Around them, the restaurant returned to its normal rhythm. Glasses clinking, low conversations, the soft sound of a piano drifting through the room. William picked up his glass of water, took a small sip, then looked at the girl again. What's your name? He asked. Annie, she said. Annie Hayes. Well, Annie, he said. Have you eaten dinner yet? She shook her head. No, sir. I'm waiting for my mom. She said we would eat together. William glanced down at his plate, then back at her. You can eat something small while you wait, he said. Her eyes widened slightly. It's okay. I can wait. My mom will be back soon. I'm sure she will, William said. But it's a long time to sit in a restaurant and watch other people eat. She didn't answer that, but her eyes flickered just for a second toward the bread basket that had been placed on the table earlier. William didn't point it out. He simply picked up the menu and signaled lightly toward a passing server. The same server returned quickly. Yes, Mr. Carter. I'd like to order something else, William said. He glanced at Annie. What do you like to eat? Annie looked startled as if no one had asked her that question in a restaurant before. I don't know, she said. Anything is okay. William turned back to the server. Bring her something simple, chicken tenders, mashed potatoes, and a glass of milk and some warm rolls. Yes, sir. The server said, now openly curious, but professional enough not to ask questions. Right away, Annie looked at William, her eyes uncertain. Sir, my mom will pay you back when she comes. William almost smiled at that, but not quite. You can have a small dinner while you wait for her, he said. Consider it my invitation. She hesitated, then nodded. Thank you, sir. He set his napkin back on his lap and picked up his fork again, though he still wasn't very hungry. Across from him, Annie sat very straight in her chair, hands folded politely, as if she were afraid that if she moved too much, someone might change their mind and tell her she had to leave after all. William looked at her for a moment, then at the empty space around the table. Then back at his plate. Annie finished the last small bite of mashed potatoes just as the front door of the restaurant opened again, letting in a gust of cool evening air and the distant sound of traffic from the street. She looked up immediately, the way she had every time the door opened, but this time her whole face changed. Mom. She slid carefully off the chair before she even realized she was doing it and hurried toward the woman who had just stepped inside, still holding her purse and looking around quickly, clearly searching. "Annie, honey," she said, kneeling slightly as Annie reached her. "I'm so sorry that took longer than I thought. Were you all right? Did you wait long?" "I'm okay, Mom," Annie said. "I sat at a table and I didn't touch anything without asking." Her mother smiled, brushing a hand gently over Annie's hair. "I knew you'd behave." Then Annie took her hand and began leading her back toward William's table. "Mom, this is the man who let me sit with him," Annie said. "He invited me to eat a little while I was waiting. I told him you would say thank you." Her mother looked up, already forming the polite apology she had probably used many times in her life when Annie spoke to strangers with too much confidence. "I'm so sorry if she disturbed you, sir," she began. "I had an urgent matter next door and I didn't want her standing outside in the cold, so I asked her to wait inside for just a few minutes. I hope she didn't cause any trouble." William had already stood up when she approached, more out of habit than thought. "It wasn't any trouble," he said. She was very polite. The woman looked at him properly then. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Time did something strange in that moment. Her eyes widened first, just slightly, as if she were looking at someone she had not expected to ever see again outside of memory. "William," she said almost in disbelief. He stared at her, searching her face for a second that felt longer than it was. The years had changed her, of course they had, but not enough to erase what he remembered. "Monica," he said, "if this moment touched your heart, please like this video, leave a comment telling us where you are watching from and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this." She let out a small breath that was almost a laugh. "I can't believe this." For the first time since Annie had approached his table, William Carter looked genuinely surprised. "I didn't recognize you at first," Monica said. "I mean, I saw your name in the news a few times and on those business magazines at the pharmacy, but I never thought I'd just walk into a restaurant and find you sitting here." William shook his head slightly, still trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the girl he remembered from years ago. "I didn't recognize you either," he admitted. "Not until you said her name." Monica looked down at Annie, who was standing between them, holding her hand and looking from one adult to the other with growing curiosity. "You know each other?" Annie asked. Monica smiled softly. "Yes, baby, we knew each other a long time ago." "A long time ago," William repeated, and something in his voice made the simple phrase sound heavier than it should have. Monica looked back at him, studying his face as if trying to see the young man she once knew inside the man he had become. "You look successful," she said, and then laughed a little at her own understatement. "That sounded silly." "Of course you are. You always said you were going to build something big, and you always said you were going to help people," William replied. "Looks like you kept your promise." She shrugged slightly. "I work at a pharmacy. I don't know if that counts as changing the world." "It counts," he said. There was a brief silence then, not uncomfortable, just full of things neither of them knew how to say in front of a child and a room full of strangers. Monica looked at the table, at the empty plate that had clearly belonged to Annie, at the glass of milk, at the folded napkin. "She ate already?" Monica asked gently. "Just a little," Annie said quickly. "He said I could eat something small while I waited. I told him you would pay him back." Monica's expression changed immediately. She reached for her purse. "Oh no, Annie, you don't have to." "I'm so sorry, William. I didn't mean for you to. Please let me pay for whatever she had." "It's taken care of," William said. "I still want to pay you back," Monica insisted quietly. "I don't want Annie thinking we accept things without saying thank you properly." William looked at her for a moment, and in that moment, he saw something he remembered clearly. "You can thank me by sitting down for a few minutes," he said. "Both of you, you just got here." Monica hesitated. "I don't want to interrupt your evening." William pulled the chair out slightly, the same chair Annie had sat in earlier. "I was already interrupted," he said, and it turned out to be a pretty good interruption. Annie looked up at her mother hopefully. "Can we sit for a minute, Mom?" Monica looked at her daughter, then back at William. "Just for a minute," she said. She sat down slowly, still looking at him as if she were trying to understand how the boy she once knew had become the man sitting across from her now in a quiet Manhattan restaurant, ordering dinner for her daughter like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I really can't believe this," she said again, shaking her head slightly. "After all these years." "Yeah," William said quietly. After all these years, Annie looked between them again, sensing something important was happening, even if she didn't understand it yet. "Mom," she said, "he was going to eat dinner all by himself." Monica smiled a little. "Was he?" William nodded once. "I usually do." Monica looked at him for a long moment. Something like sadness and something like understanding passing across her face at the same time. "Well," she said gently, I'm glad Annie found your table then. William looked at Annie, then back at Monica. So am I, he said. Monica did not leave after a minute. That was the first thing William noticed. At first, she sat the way people do when they intend to leave. Soon, coat still on, purse resting on her lap, posture polite and slightly distant. Annie sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched as if she had spent her whole life measuring the world by how far away her mother was. So, Monica said after a moment, looking around the restaurant, then back at him. You come to places like this often. More often than I should, William said. She smiled a little at that. The same small smile he remembered from years ago. The one that appeared when she thought someone was being honest in a way that mattered. I used to remember when dinner out meant splitting fries and a milkshake because we couldn't afford 2 meals, she said. William almost laughed. That place on Fulton Street, the one with the broken jukebox, she said. And the terrible coffee, he added. It wasn't terrible, Monica said. It was cheap. That's different. They both laughed softly then, and Annie watched them with growing interest, sensing that she was watching two people who had once known each other in a completely different world. You knew each other when you were kids? Annie asked. We were a little older than you, Monica said. But yes, we grew up in the same neighborhood. Was he rich then, too? Annie asked, completely serious. William nearly choked on his water. Monica laughed outright this time. A real laugh that made people at the next table glance over briefly. No, baby, Monica said. He was definitely not rich then. Not even close, William said. I had exactly one suit, and I only wore it for job interviews and funerals. And he was always late, Monica added. I was not always late. You were late the first time you asked me to get coffee. I was working, William protested. You were nervous, she said. He paused, then nodded once. That too. Annie looked delighted by this information. You were nervous of my mom. Very, William said. She was the smartest person I knew. Monica shook her head, but she was still smiling. You always say things like that. Because they were true, he replied. The server approached again, this time more relaxed, sensing the atmosphere at the table had shifted from unusual to something warmer. Would you like anything, ma'am? He asked Monica. Monica hesitated. Just coffee, please. William looked at the server. And bring a slice of apple pie, 3 forks. Monica immediately shook her head. William, you don't have to. I know, he said. I want to. She studied his face for a moment, then nodded. All right, thank you. As the server walked away, Annie leaned slightly toward her mother and whispered not very quietly. Mom, he ordered me chicken and mashed potatoes and milk. I said you would pay him back. Monica closed her eyes briefly as if she didn't know whether to laugh or apologize again. Annie, she said gently. We don't talk about money at the table. I told him we would say thank you properly. Annie said quickly. Monica looked at William. I really am grateful, but I still don't want Annie thinking people can just Monica. William said quietly. It was dinner, not alone. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. All right, then, thank you, properly. You're welcome, he said. There was a pause then, a quieter one. The kind that comes when the easy laughter fades and the present moment begins to press in again. So, William said, you work at a pharmacy now? Yes, Monica said. I'm a pharmacy technician. It's steady work, good people. And Annie said, sometimes you work nights, too. Monica glanced at Annie, then back at William. Sometimes when things get expensive, William understood what that meant without needing more explanation. Rent, school supplies, clothes, groceries, life. You always were the hardest working person I knew, he said. Monica smiled faintly. Life makes that decision for some of us. Annie looked between them again. Did you stop being friends? She asked. The question was so direct that neither adult answered immediately. Monica looked down at the table, lightly tracing the edge of her coffee cup with her finger after the server brought it. William looked at Annie, then at Monica. We didn't stop being friends, William said slowly. We just went different directions for a while. A long while, Monica said softly. Annie considered that. But you found each other again. Yes, Monica said, looking at William again. I guess we did. The apple pie arrived then, warm with 3 forks, just like William had asked. The server set it in the center of the table, and Annie's eyes widened slightly at the sight of it. You can have the first bite, William told her. She looked at her mother for permission first. Monica nodded. Annie took a small bite, then smiled in a way that made it clear that for a moment at least, the world was exactly as good as a child hoped it could be. They ate the pie slowly, passing the plate back and forth, talking about small things at first, the neighborhood they grew up in, people they used to know, teachers who had been kind, winters that had seemed colder because they had been young and walking everywhere instead of taking taxis. At one point, Annie rested her head lightly against Monica's arm, full and warm and sleepy in the soft light of the restaurant. William watched them the way Monica automatically rested her hand on Annie's shoulder. The way Annie leaned into her without asking, the quiet, practiced way they moved around each other like two people who were each other's whole world. He realized then that he had spent years building companies, negotiating contracts, buying buildings, selling buildings, traveling between cities, shaking hands, making speeches, and yet the thing that looked most like success in that moment was a tired woman in a simple coat with her daughter leaning against her shoulder. "Annie," Monica said softly after a while. "Say thank you again. We should let Mr. Carter finish his dinner." Annie sat up straight immediately. "Thank you for letting me sit here," she said. "And thank you for dinner. And for the pie." "You're very welcome," William said. Monica stood and Annie slid off her chair and picked up her canvas bag again. "It was really good to see you, William," Monica said. "I never expected this. Not like this." "Yeah," he said. "Me neither." She hesitated for a second, then reached into her purse and took out a small receipt. She turned it over and wrote something on the back, then placed it on the table near his glass. "That's my number," she said. "In case, I don't know. In case you ever want to talk about old times, or if Annie still owes you for dinner." He looked at the paper but didn't pick it up yet. "I'd like that," he said. Annie waved at him. "Bye, Mr. William. Good night, Annie." Monica smiled one more time, then took Annie's hand and began walking toward the door. Annie looked back once and waved again before they stepped out into the night. William sat down slowly after they left. The restaurant was still full. The candles were still burning. His dinner was still on the table, half-eaten. Clear's throat. Nothing in the room had changed, but the evening had changed. He reached for the receipt Monica had left and turned it over in his hand, looking at the number written in careful blue ink. For years, William Carter had been a man who planned everything. But as he sat there holding that small piece of paper, he had the quiet, unfamiliar feeling that the most important things that were about to happen in his life were not on any schedule he had ever made. William did not call the number the next day. He thought about it several times, though. The small receipt with Monica's handwriting sat on his kitchen counter that night, held in place by a crystal paper weight he had once been given after closing a deal in London. The apartment around him was quiet in the way expensive places often were: thick carpets, high ceilings, glass walls looking out over the city, like a painting that never moved fast enough to matter. He loosened his tie, poured himself a glass of water, and stood for a long time just looking at that small piece of paper, Monica Hayes. He hadn't said her name out loud in years. Not because he had forgotten it, but because some names belong to a part of life you didn't revisit once you had moved far enough away. And yet there she was again. Not in memory, not in some old photograph in a box, sitting across from him in a restaurant, her daughter eating chicken and mashed potatoes like it was the most important dinner in the world. He picked up the receipt, turned it over, and read the number again. The handwriting was the same, neat, slightly slanted, careful. Monica had always written like that, like she believed even handwriting said something about a person. He set the paper back down. He did not call that night, but he did not throw the paper away either. The next morning, his driver, Harold Bennett, was waiting downstairs as usual. Harold had been driving for William for nearly 12 years, long enough to understand the rhythms of the man's life without needing many words. "Good morning, sir," Harold said as William got into the back seat. "Morning, Harold." They pulled into traffic, merging into the steady Manhattan flow of black cars, taxis, and delivery trucks. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. Harold had learned that William preferred quiet in the mornings unless there was something specific to discuss. But at a red light, Harold glanced at William in the rear-view mirror and said, "You were out later than usual last night, sir. Briar and Ash keep you that long?" William looked up from the folder he had been pretending to read. "Something like that." Harold nodded once. "Good place to sit and think." William almost smiled. Harold never asked direct questions, but he noticed everything. "There was a little girl," William said after a moment. Harold raised his eyebrows slightly in the mirror, but said nothing. "Waiting. She asked if she could sit at my table while she waited for her mother." William continued. "All the other tables were full." "And what did you say?" Harold asked. "I told her no at first." Harold nodded slowly as if that made sense. And then William looked out the window at the people walking along the sidewalk, coats pulled tight against the wind, coffee cups in their hands, faces already set for the day. "And then I told her." "Yes," he said. Harold's eyes softened slightly in the mirror. "Funny how that happens." "What?" "Life," Harold said. "Sometimes it doesn't knock on the front door. Sometimes it just walks up and asks if it can sit down for a minute. William looked back down at the folder, but he wasn't reading anymore. By the time he reached his office, the city had fully woken up. Phones were ringing. Assistants were moving quickly through hallways. Screens were already filled with numbers and headlines and decisions waiting to be made. William Carter spent the entire morning in meetings, a hotel acquisition, a conference call with investors in Chicago, a legal review, lunch brought into the office that he barely touched. His assistant Rachel reminded him about a charity board meeting next week, a flight to San Francisco on Thursday, and a dinner with 2 potential partners on Friday. From the outside, it looked like the life of a man exactly where he had planned to be 20 years ago. But 3 times that day in between meetings, he found himself opening his desk drawer, looking at the folded receipt inside and closing the drawer again without doing anything. At 4:30 in the afternoon, after his last meeting ended, he finally picked it up. He looked at the number for a long moment, then dialed before he could change his mind. It rang 3 times. "Hello," Monica's voice said on the other end, a little breathless, like she had answered quickly between tasks. "Monica," he said, "it's William." There was a pause, not a long one, but long enough for recognition to settle in. "William," she said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. Hi, he said back. And for a second, he felt strangely like a much younger version of himself, standing outside a diner with a paper cup of coffee, trying to think of something intelligent to say. "I hope it's okay that I called," he said. "I gave you the number," she replied. "I was hoping you would." That surprised him more than it should have. "Annie asked this morning if I thought you would call," Monica said. "I told her I didn't know. She said she thought you would because you seemed like the kind of person who keeps invitations." William leaned back in his chair slowly. "She's a very observant kid." "She is," Monica said. "Sometimes I think she understands people better than most adults." There was a small pause. "Comfortable this time?" "How is she?" William asked. "She's good." Monica said she told her teacher today that she had dinner at a very fancy restaurant and ate apple pie with a man who used to know her mom when she was young. William laughed softly. "That's one way to summarize it." There was a sound in the background, like a door closing and a child's voice calling, "Mom, I'm here." Monica called back, then returned to the phone. "Sorry, we just got home. Did I catch you at a bad time?" William asked. "No," she said, "just a normal time. Homework, dinner, laundry, the exciting life." "I remember you used to say you wanted a quiet life," he said. "I did," she replied. "I just didn't know quiet could also be this busy." He could picture it without seeing it. A small apartment, a kitchen table with papers spread across it, a child's backpack on the floor, a life built carefully, paycheck by paycheck, decision by decision. "Monica," he said after a moment, would you and Annie like to have dinner with me sometime properly? I mean, not by accident this time." There was a pause on the line longer this time. "I don't want you to feel like you owe me," he added quickly. "You don't. I'd like to see you again, both of you." He heard her exhale softly. "Annie is going to be very happy if I say yes," Monica said. "And you?" he asked quietly. Another pause. "I think," she said slowly, "I would like that too." William looked out the window of his office at the city stretching out below him. All the buildings, all the people, all the lives moving in 1,000 different directions. "Then it's a date," he said before he could stop himself. Monica laughed softly. "You always did move fast once you made up your mind." "I was late the first time," he said. "I'm trying not to be late again." This time she didn't laugh right away. "All right, William," she said gently. "Dinner. But somewhere Annie can pronounce the food." He smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Deal." After they hung up, William sat in his chair for a long time, the phone still in his hand. He had closed deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars in that office. He had made decisions that affected companies, employees, entire developments. But as he sat there looking at the city and thinking about a woman he had not seen in years and a little girl who had asked him for a chair, he had the quiet, steady feeling that he had just agreed to something far more important than any contract he had ever signed. William chose a different restaurant for the second dinner. Not because he was embarrassed about Briar and Ash, and not because he thought Monica would feel out of place there. She had carried herself with more dignity in that room than half the people who could afford to eat there every week. But he remembered what she had said on the phone. Somewhere Annie can pronounce the food. So, he chose a small, well-loved Italian place on the Upper West Side, the kind with warm lighting, checkered tablecloths, and a menu that didn't require a dictionary. The kind of place where families came on Friday nights, where the owner stood near the door and greeted regulars by name, where no one looked twice if a child laughed too loudly. William arrived early, as he always did. He sat at a corner table, not as isolated as the one at Briar and Ash, but still quiet enough for conversation. He checked his watch once, then told himself not to do that again. At exactly 6 o'clock, the door opened and Annie walked in first, holding it for her mother. William stood up immediately. Annie spotted him and waved. "Hi, Mr. William." "Hi, Annie," he said, smiling in a way that still felt new on his face. "Hi, Monica." "Hi," Monica said, a little out of breath from the cold outside. "I hope we're not late." "You're right on time," he said. They sat down and Annie looked around the restaurant with open curiosity, not trying to hide it this time. "This place smells really good," she said. "That's usually a good sign," William replied. A waiter came over with menus, but Annie was already looking at the pictures on the children's menu. "They have spaghetti," she announced as if she had discovered something important. "Spaghetti is a very serious decision," William said. "You shouldn't rush into it." Annie looked at him solemnly. "I'm going to think about it very carefully." Monica shook her head, smiling. "She's been excited about this all day." "You told her where we were going?" William asked. "I told her we were having dinner with an old friend," Monica said. "She figured out the rest." "I told my teacher, too," Annie added. "I said I was having dinner with my mom and a businessman." William raised an eyebrow. "A businessman? I didn't know how to explain what you do." Annie said. "Mom said you build companies." "That sounds like a businessman." "That's close enough." He said they ordered spaghetti for Annie, lasagna for Monica, and something simple for William. Bread arrived first, warm and soft, and Annie waited until both adults had taken a piece before she took one herself. "You don't have to wait," William told her. "My mom says it's polite," Annie said. William looked at Monica. "You did a good job." Monica smiled faintly. "I did my best." There was a small silence then, but it wasn't awkward. It was the silence of people who were beginning to learn each other again. "So," William said, "tell me about your life now." Monica took a sip of water before answering. "There's not much to tell. I work. Annie goes to school. We come home. We have dinner. We do homework. We go to bed and then we do it again the next day." "That sounds like a lot," he said. "It is," she replied simply. "But it's a good life. Not easy, but good." "And Annie's father?" William asked gently. Monica didn't look surprised that he asked. She had probably expected the question eventually. "He left when Annie was 3, she said. "At first, he said it was temporary. Then he stopped calling. Then he stopped sending money. Then he disappeared." "I'm sorry," William said quietly. She shrugged slightly, but there was no bitterness in the gesture, just acceptance. "I was angry for a long time. Then I realized being angry didn't help Annie with her homework or pay the rent, so I stopped being angry." Annie was quietly drawing on a paper placemat with a crayon the waiter had given her, humming softly to herself. Used to adults having conversations she only half listened to. "You did all of it by yourself," William said. "Yes," Monica replied, "but I wasn't really alone. I had Annie. And Annie had me." William nodded slowly. "Still, that's a lot for one person." Monica looked at him for a moment. "You did a lot too, William. I read about you sometimes. New buildings, new companies, interviews, awards." "That's just work," he said. She tilted her head slightly. "You used to say work was how you were going to build a different life." "I did build a different life," he said. "Are you happy?" she asked. The question was quiet, but it landed in the center of the table like something heavy and fragile at the same time. William didn't answer immediately. Across from him, Annie was carefully coloring a small house with a red crayon. "I'm successful," he said after a moment. Monica didn't look away. "That's not what I asked." He exhaled slowly, then gave the only honest answer he had. "I don't know," he said. She nodded once, as if she appreciated the truth more than a polished answer. Their food arrived then, and the conversation paused while plates were set down and Parmesan cheese was offered. Annie looked at her plate like it was a celebration. "This is the best day," she announced. "Why?" William asked. "Because I had apple pie with you and now I have spaghetti with you and my mom," she said as if the math was very clear. Monica smiled, but William looked down at his plate for a second, something in his chest tightening in a way he wasn't used to. They ate for a while, talking about smaller things, Annie's school, her favorite subject, the fact that she liked reading but not math, that Monica worked near a subway line that was always late, that William still worked too much. At one point, Annie looked up and said, "Mr. William, why do you work so much?" William thought about that. "Because when I was younger, I didn't have very much," he said. "And I thought if I worked hard enough, I would never have to worry again." "Do you still worry?" Annie asked. He looked at her, then at Monica, then back at Annie. Yes, he said, just about different things. Annie considered that carefully, then nodded as if that made sense. After dinner, when the check came, Monica reached for her purse again, but William shook his head. Next time, he said. Monica looked at him. You're assuming there will be a next time. William met her eyes calmly. I'm hoping there will be. Annie looked between them and smiled as if she had just heard the answer to a question no one had asked out loud yet. A few days passed before William saw them again. He did not plan every meeting. But he noticed that once Annie knew he existed, she assumed he would continue to exist in her life in a steady, reliable way. She did not say this directly, but it showed in the way she spoke on the phone when Monica occasionally let her say hello. Are you working? She asked him one evening when Monica put the call on speaker while she cooked. Yes, William said. I work a lot. Do you eat dinner? Annie asked. Itto. Do you eat alone? William glanced around his quiet kitchen at the clean counters and the city lights beyond the window. Most of the time there was a pause on the line. Then Annie said, you can eat with us sometimes. My mom makes really good soup. In the background, Monica said, Annie, don't invite people without asking. I'm asking now, Annie replied logically. Mr. William, do you like soup? William found himself smiling. I like soup. So, 3 nights later, he found himself standing in front of a modest apartment building in Queens, holding a small paper bag from a bakery, and feeling more uncertain than he had before some of the biggest meetings of his career. The building was older, but well kept. The lobby smelled faintly of cleaning solution and someone's cooking. A row of mailboxes lined one wall, each labeled carefully. Children's drawings were taped near the elevator. Crooked houses, bright suns, stick figure families holding hands. William looked at those drawings longer than he meant to before pressing the elevator button. When Monica opened the door, she looked surprised for half a second, then smiled. You found the place. I've been told I'm good at finding things, he said, holding up the bakery bag. I brought dessert. I wasn't sure what Annie liked, so I brought several options. Monica laughed softly. You always did overprepare. Some habits don't change, he said. Annie appeared from behind her mother and broke into a wide smile. You came. I said I would, William replied. Annie nodded as if that confirmed something important she had suspected about him. The apartment was small but warm. A couch with a knitted blanket draped over the back. A bookshelf with more children's books than adult ones. A small kitchen where a pot simmered on the stove. The table was already set for 3 mismatched plates. Simple glasses, paper napkins folded carefully. You didn't have to bring anything, Monica said as he stepped inside. My mother would have said it's rude to come to someone's home empty-handed, William replied. Monica took the bag from him and looked inside. Cupcakes, pie, and cookies, William. I wasn't sure, he said again. Annie looked into the bag and whispered, this is the best day again. They sat down at the small table and Monica served soup and grilled cheese sandwiches. It was simple food, but it was hot and homemade and served in a room where people talked to each other instead of checking their phones. William realized he could not remember the last time he had eaten in a place like this. Annie talked about school, about a girl who sat next to her who always lost her pencils, about a reading assignment she liked. Monica listened while also reminding her to drink her water and not talk with her mouth full. At one point, Annie asked, Mr. William, did you have a mom who made soup? The question caught him off guard. Yes, he said, I did when I was very young. Annie waited, sensing there was more. She died when I was about your age, he said quietly. Monica looked up at him, surprised. William, I didn't know that. There's a lot we didn't know back then, he said. Annie's voice softened. Who made your soup after that? No one for a while, he said. Then a lot of different people. In a lot of different places. Annie seemed to think about that very seriously. Then she slid her grilled cheese sandwich onto his plate. You can have half of mine, she said. William stared at the sandwich for a moment, then at her. Why are you giving me your sandwich? He asked. Because you didn't have soup when you were little, she said, as if the logic were obvious. So now you can have some of mine. Monica covered her mouth with her hand for a second, and William looked down at the plate because something in his chest had tightened in a way he could not quite control. Thank you, Annie, he said quietly. That's very kind. After dinner, Annie did her homework at the table while Monica washed dishes and William dried them without being asked. At one point, Monica handed him a plate and said, you don't have to do that. I know, he said, I want to. She looked at him for a moment, then nodded and handed him another plate. Later, Annie brought her book over. Will you listen to me read? She asked. I'd like that, he said. She read slowly, carefully, sounding out the longer words, occasionally looking up to see if he was paying attention. He was. When she finished, he said, "You're a very good reader." "She practices every night," Monica said from the couch. "She says she wants to be the smartest person in the room." "That's a good goal," William said. Annie looked at him. "Are you the smartest person in your room?" "Not always," he said. "But I try to hire people who are smarter than me." "That's how you build good companies." Annie nodded, satisfied with that answer. It was getting late when William finally stood to leave. Annie walked him to the door. "Will you come back?" she asked. William looked down at her. "If your mom says it's okay." Annie looked back at Monica, who was standing a few steps away watching them. "It's okay," Monica said quietly. William nodded. "Then yes, I'll come back." Annie seemed satisfied with that. She hugged him quickly, unexpectedly, then stepped back like she wasn't sure if that had been allowed. William gently put a hand on her shoulder. "Good night, Annie." "Good night, Mr. William." Monica walked him to the door and stepped into the hallway with him for a moment. "You don't have to do this," she said softly. "Come here. Bring food, help with dishes, listen to reading. You don't owe us anything." William looked at her for a long moment. "I know," he said. "I'm not here because I owe you." "Then why are you here?" she asked. He thought about the empty apartment waiting for him across the river. The quiet dinners, the long days, the years that had passed without him noticing what was missing. "Because," he said slowly, "this is the first place I've been in a long time where I don't feel like I'm just passing through." Monica didn't say anything for a moment. Then she nodded once. "Good night, William." "Good night, Monica." As he walked down the hallway and out into the cold night, William realized something had changed in a way that had nothing to do with money, work, or success. For the first time in years, there was a place where someone was expecting him to come back. A week passed, and William found himself returning to Queens more often than he had expected. At first, he told himself it was just dinner, just conversation, just checking in on an old friend and her daughter. But by the third visit, he noticed that Annie no longer reacted with surprise when he knocked on the door. She reacted with certainty. "You're late," Annie said one evening when he arrived 7 minutes past 6. William looked at his watch. 7 minutes is not late. 7 minutes is slightly delayed. "My teacher says if you say 6 o'clock, you should come at 6 o'clock, Annie replied. Monica called from the kitchen. "Annie, don't interrogate our guest." "I'm not interrogating," Annie said. "I'm helping him improve." William laughed under his breath and handed Monica a small bag of groceries. "Peace offering," he said. "You don't have to bring food every time," Monica said, though she took the bag and began unpacking it. "You're going to spoil her." "I'm not spoiling her," William replied. "I'm investing in her opinion of me." Annie nodded seriously. "That's smart." They ate dinner together again. Something simple pasta Monica had made. Salad and bread William had picked up from a bakery on the way. The routine had started to feel natural in a way that surprised all three of them. After dinner, Annie did her homework at the table while Monica and William sat on the couch with cups of tea. "You don't have to come this often," Monica said quietly while Annie worked. "I don't want Annie to start expecting it." William looked across the room at Annie, who was frowning in concentration at a math problem. "She already expects it." "That's what I'm afraid of," Monica said. He turned back to her. "Why does that scare you?" Monica was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was calm. But there was something fragile under the calm because Annie has already had one man walk out of her life, she said. "I told myself I would never let her get attached to someone who might disappear again." William did not answer immediately. "That's fair," he said. "Finally, you're protecting her." "I'm trying," Monica said. "She doesn't need promises. She needs stability, routine. People who stay." William nodded. Slowly. "I understand that. Do you?" Monica asked, looking at him carefully. "Because your world is very different from ours, William. You travel. You work all the time. You live in a world where people cancel dinner because of meetings and reschedule life like it's a conference call." He didn't argue because she wasn't wrong. "I'm not asking you for anything," she continued. "I just need to know that if you're going to be in her life, you're not going to disappear one day because work got busy or because this stopped being interesting." William leaned forward slightly, resting his hands together. "When I was a kid," he said, "there were a lot of adults who came in and out of my life. Teachers, neighbors, social workers, people who said they were going to help, and some of them did, but most of them left when their shift ended or when they moved or when something better came along." Monica listened without interrupting. "The ones I remember," he continued, "are not the ones who gave speeches or advice. They're the ones who showed up again and again and again. Same place, same time until I stopped wondering if they were coming back." Monica's eyes softened slightly. And you want to be that person for Annie? William thought about the question carefully before answering. I don't know what I'm allowed to be yet, he said. But I know I don't want to be someone who disappears. Across the room, Annie suddenly said, I heard that. Both adults looked at her. You're supposed to be doing math, Monica said. I am doing math, Annie replied. And listening, I can do two things, William smiled. That's a useful skill. Annie looked at him seriously. Are you going to disappear? The room went very quiet. Monica started to say something, but William answered first. No, he said, I don't plan to. Annie studied his face for a long moment, as if she were trying to decide whether he understood the weight of the question she had asked. Okay, she said finally and went back to her homework. Later that evening, after Annie had gone to brush her teeth, Monica stood by the kitchen sink while William dried the last dish. You answered her very quickly, Monica said. I didn't want her to think I was thinking of leaving, he replied. Monica turned to face him. William, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest with me. All right, why are you really here? She asked. Not the polite answer, not the old friend's answer, the real one. William set the dish towel down and leaned against the counter for a moment, thinking, I came the first time because Annie asked me if I was lonely, he said. And I realized I didn't like the answer. Monica didn't speak, so he continued. I came the second time because I wanted to see you again, he said. I won't pretend that's not true. I thought about you for a long time after we lost touch, longer than I should have. She looked down slightly, her expression unreadable. And now, she asked, now I come because when I'm here, your daughter hands me half her sandwich if she thinks I didn't have soup when I was a kid, he said quietly. Because you make tea and talk to me like I'm still the same person you knew before I had a title in front of my name. Because this place feels more like a home than my apartment does. Monica's eyes filled slightly, but she blinked the tears back before they fell. You're making this very difficult for me, she said softly. I'm not trying to, he replied. I know, she said. That's why it's difficult. From the hallway, Annie called. Mom, where is my blue book? On the shelf by the couch, Monica called back. Then she looked at William again. She's starting to look for you when she gets home from school. Monica said. She asked me yesterday if you liked pancakes because she wanted to know if we should make them on Saturday. William felt something in his chest shift at that. Something warm and heavy and a little frightening. I like pancakes, he said. Monica smiled faintly. I thought you might. There was a long, quiet moment between them, filled with things neither of them said yet. Finally, William picked up his coat. I'll come Saturday, he said. For pancakes. Monica walked him to the door again, the same way she always did. William, she said before he left. Yes, just don't make promises you can't keep, she said. Not to me, to her. William met her eyes and nodded once. I understand. As he walked down the hallway and out into the cool night air, he realized that somewhere along the way, without any formal decision, without any conversation where anyone named it out loud, he had started to build something with Monica and Annie. Not a business, not a deal, something slower, something quieter, something that for the first time in his life he was afraid of losing. Saturday morning arrived with cold sunlight and a sky so clear it made the city look almost gentle. William stood in a small grocery store on the corner near Monica's building, staring at a shelf of pancake mix like it was a business decision with long-term consequences. He had not made pancakes in years. In fact, he wasn't sure he had ever made pancakes from scratch in his life. An older woman standing nearby noticed his expression and smiled. First time, she asked. Is it that obvious? William replied. She nodded toward the shelf. Get the buttermilk one. And don't forget syrup. Real syrup, not the cheap kind. Thank you, William said, reaching for the box she pointed at. And get some strawberries, she added. Kids like strawberries on pancakes. William picked up strawberries, too, then paused and added whipped cream to the basket just in case. When he knocked on Monica's door 20 minutes later, Annie opened it before he could knock a second time. You came, she said, as if there had still been some doubt. I said I would, William replied, holding up the grocery bag, and I brought supplies. Annie looked inside the bag like it was a treasure chest. Strawberries, Mom, he brought strawberries. Monica appeared behind her, tying her hair back. You didn't have to bring half the store, she said. But she was smiling. I was told pancakes are serious, William said. I didn't want to take any risks. Annie grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the kitchen. Do you know how to make them? Not exactly, he admitted. That's okay, Annie said. Mom knows. You can be in charge of stirring. I can handle stirring, he said. The kitchen was small, Barely enough room for 2 people to move comfortably, but somehow all 3 of them fit. Monica mixed the batter while Annie stood on a chair and William sliced strawberries at the counter like a man concentrating on a task much more complicated than fruit. "You're cutting them very carefully," Monica said. "I negotiate billion-dollar contracts," William replied. "I assume strawberries deserve the same level of attention." Annie giggled. "You're funny, Mr. William." "I'm glad someone thinks so," he said. They cooked together, Annie flipping one pancake too early and creating a folded mess that she insisted on eating anyway because she had made it herself. Monica moved around the kitchen with the easy efficiency of someone used to making do with limited space and time. William followed instructions, stirred when told, flipped pancakes under supervision, and set the table when Annie handed him plates. They ate at the small table by the window, sunlight falling across the plates, the room warm from the stove. "This is the best breakfast," Annie announced, her mouth full before Monica gave her a look, and she covered it with her hand. "Sorry, but it is." William looked at Monica over Annie's head. "I think I've been missing out." "You've probably had better breakfasts," Monica said. "More expensive," he said. "Not better." After breakfast, Annie disappeared into her room to get dressed for the day, leaving William and Monica alone at the table with coffee. "You don't look like a man who spends Saturday mornings making pancakes," Monica said. "I don't," he replied. "Usually, I'm in an office or on a plane. So, why are you here instead?" William looked down at his coffee for a moment, then back at her. "Because I'd rather be here." Monica studied his face carefully, as if trying to see whether that answer was temporary or permanent. "Annie likes you," she said. "I like Annie," he replied. "She's starting to rely on you," Monica said. "I need you to understand what that means." "I do," he said. "Or at least I'm trying to." Monica traced the rim of her coffee cup with her finger, thinking when her father left, she said. She kept asking when he was coming back. "At first, I told her the truth that I didn't know. Then after a while, she stopped asking." "That was worse." William didn't interrupt. "She stopped asking," Monica continued, "but she started watching the door. Every time someone walked past our apartment in the hallway, she looked up. Every time a car slowed down outside, she looked out the window. She never said it out loud again, but she was always waiting." William felt his chest tighten slightly. "Does she still wait?" he asked quietly. Monica shook her head. "Not for him. But kids like Annie, they don't stop hoping. They just choose new people to hope about." At that moment, Annie ran back into the kitchen wearing a bright sweater and carrying a small book. "Can we go to the park?" she asked. "It's sunny." Monica looked at William. "Do you have time for the park, Mr. Very important businessman?" William stood up and reached for his coat. "I think the park is a very important meeting." Central Park was busy with weekend families, dogs, joggers, and children chasing pigeons. Annie ran ahead on the path, then ran back, then ahead again, unable to decide whether she was more excited about the park or about the fact that William was there to see it with her. At one point, she grabbed his hand without asking and pulled him toward a small pond where children were throwing pieces of bread to ducks. "Do you have ducks near your house?" she asked. "No," William said. "I have traffic." "That's sad," Annie said. He laughed. "Yes, it is." They sat on a bench while Annie watched the ducks. Monica sat on one side of him, Annie on the other, swinging her legs and talking about school and books and how she wanted to learn how to ride a bike without training wheels. "Do you know how to ride a bike?" Annie asked William. "Yes." "Will you teach me?" she asked. The question was so natural, so immediate that he answered before he thought about it. "Yes," he said. Monica looked at him quickly when he said that, but Annie just smiled like she had known the answer would be yes. As they sat there, Annie eventually leaned against his arm, warm and comfortable, like it was the most natural thing in the world. William didn't move. He was afraid that if he moved too quickly, he might break something invisible and important. Monica watched them quietly for a long time. "You know what she's doing, right?" Monica said softly. "What?" William asked. "She's making room for you," Monica said. "In her world, once she does that, she doesn't take it back easily." William looked down at Annie, leaning against him, then back at Monica. "I'm not planning to go anywhere," he said. Monica held his gaze for a few seconds, as if measuring the weight of that sentence. "Just make sure," she said quietly, "that you mean that before you say it too many times." William nodded once. On the other side of him, Annie pointed at the water. "Look," she said, "that duck is following us." William looked at the duck, then at Annie, then at Monica. For the first time in many years, sitting on a park bench on a cold but sunny morning, he realized he was not thinking about work or deals or schedules. He was thinking about pancakes and ducks in a small hand that had reached for his without asking. And he realized a little uneasily, but also with a quiet sense of certainty that his life was beginning to rearrange itself around two people he had not even known a few weeks ago. On Monday morning, William returned to his office and discovered that nothing in his world had slowed down just because something in his life had started to change. His assistant, Rachel, was already waiting with a tablet in her hand when he walked in. "You have the Henderson meeting in 20 minutes, the Chicago investors at 11 o'clock, and the legal team at 1 o'clock, she said, walking beside him as he moved down the hallway. "Also, the board wants to move Thursday's dinner to Wednesday. And your mother's foundation called again about the spring gala." William nodded, taking it all in the way he always did, calm, efficient, controlled. But as Rachel finished listing the schedule, she added, "You've been leaving earlier lately." William glanced at her. Rachel had worked for him for 6 years. She was efficient, discreet, and noticed everything without appearing to. "I didn't realize you were tracking my departure time," he said. "I track everything," she replied. "It's my job," he almost smiled. "I've been having dinner with friends." Rachel nodded once, accepting that answer without pushing. "That's good," she said. "You didn't used to have time for that." He went into his office and closed the door. But instead of sitting down immediately, he walked to the window and looked out over the city. A few weeks ago, his life had been very simple in a way that required no thought. Work, meetings, travel, quiet apartment. Repeat. Now, there were dinners in Queens, pancakes on Saturdays, and a small voice on the phone asking if he liked soup. At noon, in the middle of a meeting about a new development project, his phone buzzed once on the table. He normally ignored personal messages during meetings, but something made him glance at the screen. It was a text from Monica. "Annie has a school reading thing on Thursday at 6 o'clock. She wanted me to ask if you might come. Only if you're free." He stared at the message for a second longer than he should have. Across the table, one of the partners was explaining projected returns, pointing at a chart, waiting for William's response. William forced himself to focus, asked 2 questions, made a decision, and ended the meeting, but the message stayed in his mind, a school reading thing. At 6 o'clock on Thursday, he was supposed to be at a dinner with 2 men who were considering investing in one of his largest projects of the year. He sat at his desk after the meeting, looking at his calendar. 6 o'clock Midtown, important dinner. 6 o'clock, a classroom somewhere in Queens. A little girl reading out loud, probably looking up every few seconds to see if he had come. He picked up his phone and called Rachel. "Yes," she answered. "I need to move Thursday's dinner," he said. There was a pause. "That dinner took 3 weeks to schedule. Then we'll reschedule it again." "May I ask why?" Rachel said carefully. William looked at the message again before answering. "I have somewhere else I need to be." Rachel was quiet for a second. Then she said, "All right, I'll make it happen. Thank you." When he arrived at the school on Thursday evening, he felt more out of place than he had in any boardroom in the world. The hallway walls were covered with children's drawings, spelling tests, construction paper cut into the shapes of leaves and stars. Parents stood in small groups talking quietly. Children ran past with books in their hands and excitement in their voices. William stood near the back of the classroom door, feeling strangely nervous. Monica spotted him first. Her face showed surprise, then something softer. "You came," she said quietly as she walked over to him. "I said I would try," he replied. "You didn't say you would cancel a business dinner," she said. He shrugged slightly. "I didn't say I wouldn't either." She looked at him for a long moment, then said, "She's been looking at the door every 30 seconds. Inside the classroom, children sat in small chairs while parents stood along the walls. Annie sat in the second row holding a book in both hands, her feet not quite touching the floor. She looked toward the door again. This time, she saw him. Her entire face lit up and she lifted her hand and waved quickly before remembering she was supposed to be sitting still. William lifted his hand and waved back. He had never closed a deal that made him feel the way that small wave did. The teacher began calling students one by one to come to the front and read. Each child walked up, some confident, some shy, some stumbling over words while their parents smiled and nodded encouragingly. When it was Annie's turn, she walked to the front of the room holding her book carefully. She looked at the first page, then up at the room, and for a second, her eyes searched the crowd until they found Monica. Then they moved to William. He nodded once, just a small nod, but she saw it. She began to read. She read slowly, carefully, sounding out the long words, turning the pages with small, precise movements. Halfway through, she made a mistake, stopped, frowned, and then corrected herself, and kept going. William realized he was holding his breath. When she finished, the room clapped and Annie smiled in that quiet, proud way children do when they have done something that scared them a little. After the reading, Children ran to their parents and Annie ran straight to William before she even reached her mother. "You came," she said again like she still couldn't quite believe it. "I told you I would try," he said. "You didn't try," she said. "You came." Monica walked up to them, her eyes bright in a way he hadn't seen before. "Her teacher says she's one of the best readers in the class," she said. "I'm not the best," Annie said. "But I'm getting better." "You were very brave," William told her. Annie looked up at him. "I wasn't scared because you were here." The words were simple. She said them without drama, without realizing how much weight they carried. William looked at Monica, and Monica looked back at him. And in that moment, both of them understood something had changed again. Quietly but permanently. Later, as they walked out of the school into the cool evening air, Annie held his hand on one side and Monica walked on the other. "Can we get hot chocolate?" Annie asked. "I think that can be arranged," William said as they walked down the sidewalk together. Annie swinging his hand slightly as she walked between them. William realized that for the first time in his life, success was no longer the thing he was most afraid of losing. Now it was this. They walked to a small cafe on the corner, the kind of place that stayed open late for students and tired workers and people who wanted something warm before going home. The windows were fogged slightly from the heat inside, and the smell of chocolate and coffee wrapped around them the moment they stepped in. Annie chose a table near the window and pressed her hands against the glass for a second. "It's warm in here," she said, as if that alone made the place wonderful. William ordered 3 hot chocolates and a slice of chocolate cake to share. When he brought the tray back, Annie looked at the mugs like they were a reward for something important. "You read very well tonight," he told her as he set the mug down carefully in front of her. "I practiced," Annie said. "Mom made me read the same book 3 times. "That's because you try to skip words when you think I'm not listening," Monica said. Annie smiled a little. "I don't skip big words anymore." "You didn't skip any tonight," William said. "You did it properly." Annie wrapped both hands around the mug, warming her fingers. "I wasn't scared," she said again, because you were there and Mom was there, so I knew if I messed up, it was okay. William didn't answer right away. He looked at the steam rising from his cup and thought about how many rooms he had stood in where nobody would have noticed if he had messed up, rooms full of people who only cared whether he succeeded or failed, not whether he was nervous. "That's how it's supposed to be," he said quietly. "When you do something hard, the people who care about you should be in the room." Monica looked at him when he said that. Really looked at him as if she were trying to understand how a man who spent his life in boardrooms understood something so simple so clearly. They shared the cake with 3 forks. Annie taking very small bites to make it last longer. Outside the window, people walked past in coats and scarves, heads down against the wind. "Mr. William," Annie said after a while. "Yes. Were you scared when you were little and had to do things by yourself?" The question came out of nowhere, but somehow it didn't feel like a childish question. It felt like she was trying to understand something about him the way children sometimes try to map the world by comparing stories. "Yes," he said. "I was scared a lot." "What did you do?" she asked. "I learned to pretend I wasn't," he said. "And after a while, pretending and being brave start to feel the same." Annie thought about that. "Mom says being brave is when you do something, even if you're scared." "Your mom is right," William said. Monica smiled faintly into her cup. "I say a lot of things. I just don't know if anyone listens." "I listen," Annie said. William nodded. "So do I." They finished their hot chocolate slowly, not rushing, as if none of them wanted to be the first one to say it was time to go home. When they finally stepped back outside, the air had turned colder. Annie walked between them again, holding Monica's hand on one side and William's on the other, swinging their arms slightly as they walked down the sidewalk. At the corner where they would part ways, Annie stopped. "Are you coming for dinner on Sunday?" she asked William. William looked at Monica before answering. "Am I invited?" Monica hesitated for just a second, then said, "You're invited." "Then I'll be there," he said. Annie nodded, satisfied. "Okay." She hugged him quickly again, then let go and took her mother's hand. "Good night, Mr. William." "Good night, Annie." Monica lingered for a moment after Annie started walking a few steps ahead. "You didn't have to cancel your dinner," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. "Those were important people, weren't they?" "Yes. And you canceled it anyway." "Yes." Monica looked down the street where Annie was walking, then back at him. "Why?" William thought about giving an easy answer, something light, something that would not make the moment heavier than it needed to be. But Monica had never been someone he could lie to, not even years ago. Because when Annie stood in that classroom and looked at the door, he said slowly, "I knew that if I didn't walk in, she would pretend it didn't matter, and I didn't want to be someone she had to pretend about." Monica's eyes filled slightly, but she blinked and looked away toward the street lights. She used to look at the door like that for her father, Monica said quietly. For a long time, William didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't try to fill the silence. I don't know what this is yet, William, Monica continued. You and me, you and Annie. All of this, I don't know where it's going. I know, he said. But I do know this, she said, looking back at him. You showed up tonight, and that mattered more than you probably realize. He nodded once. It mattered to me, too. They stood there for a moment longer, neither of them quite ready to walk away. You're different from the boy I knew, Monica said finally. I hope that's a good thing, he replied. She smiled a little. It is. You're steadier, quieter, like you learned how to carry heavy things without talking about them. That's a polite way of saying I got older, he said. That's a polite way of saying life happened, she replied. Annie turned back and called. Mom, we're going to miss the light. I'm coming. Monica called back, then looked at William one more time. Sunday, she said. Sunday, he agreed. He watched them walk down the street together. Monica's hand on Annie's shoulder, Annie talking and pointing at something he couldn't hear from that distance. For a long time after they disappeared around the corner, William stood there on the sidewalk with his hands in his coat pockets, the cold air sharp in his lungs, the city moving around him like it always did. But everything inside him felt different now. He had spent most of his life building a future, always thinking about what came next, what came bigger, what came after success. Now for the first time, he found himself thinking about something much simpler. Sunday dinner and the quiet, unfamiliar realization that there were two people in the world who would notice if he didn't show up. Sunday dinner felt different from the moment William woke up. He noticed it in the way he stood in his kitchen that morning, looking at his calendar, making sure nothing could interrupt the evening. He had moved meetings before, rescheduled flights, delegated decisions that he normally handled himself, all so that when 6 o'clock came, he would be exactly where he said he would be. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he left his apartment with a small box in his hand. Inside the box was something simple, a children's book he had seen in a bookstore 2 days earlier. It was a classic story about a little girl who wanted to build something big when she grew up. He didn't know why it made him think of Annie, but it had. When Monica opened the door that evening, the apartment smelled like roasted chicken and herbs. You're early, she said. I didn't want to be late, he replied. Annie ran into the hallway when she heard his voice. You came. I said I would, he said again and handed her the small box. This is for you. Annie looked at the box carefully before opening it like she had been taught not to tear wrapping paper even when she was excited. When she saw the book, her face lit up. A book, she said. Thank you. What do you say? Monica asked from behind her. Thank you, Mr. William, Annie said, then hugged the book to her chest. Will you read it with me after dinner? I'd like that, he said. Dinner that night felt more like a routine than a special occasion, and somehow that made it more important. They talked about small things: Annie's spelling test, Monica's work, a rude customer at the pharmacy, a new project William was working on but didn't explain in detail because Annie was at the table. Halfway through dinner, Annie said, we learned about families at school this week. Monica glanced at her. Oh yeah, Annie said. Some kids have a mom and a dad. Some kids have two moms. Some kids live with their grandma, and some kids just have one parent. She said it casually, but both adults at the table understood that this was not just a random school story. And what did you say? Monica asked gently. I said, I have my mom, Annie replied. Then she looked at William. And I think I have you, too. But I didn't know what to call you. The room went very quiet. Monica set her fork down slowly. William didn't move at all. Annie looked between them, suddenly worried. Did I say something wrong? No, Monica said quickly, reaching for her hand. You didn't say anything wrong. Annie looked at William, waiting. He chose his words carefully because he understood that this was not a business conversation where you could fix a mistake later with another meeting. You can call me William, he said gently. And you can call me your friend. That would make me very happy. Annie thought about that. Okay, she said, but you're a little bit like family. Monica closed her eyes for a brief second, as if the sentence had hit somewhere deep. After dinner, Annie brought the new book to the couch and climbed up beside William while Monica finished the dishes. William read slowly, doing different voices for the characters, something he had never done before in his life. Annie leaned against his arm, following along with her finger under the words. When the story ended, Annie yawned. I like this book, she said sleepily. I'm glad, he replied. Will you still come when I'm in second grade? She asked, her eyes already half closed. William felt the weight of that question more than almost anything she had asked before. Yes, he said quietly. If your mom says it's okay, I'll still come when you're in 2nd grade and 3rd grade, she asked. He smiled slightly. That too. And when I'm big. He looked up then and Monica was standing in the kitchen doorway watching them. When you're big, he said slowly. You might be too busy to have dinner with me anymore. Annie shook her head, already half asleep. I'll still have dinner with you. A few minutes later, Monica carried her to bed. William sat alone on the couch for a moment, looking at the quiet apartment. The book still in his hands. Monica came back a few minutes later and sat down across from him. She's getting attached, Monica said softly. I know, he replied. And I think I am, too, she said, her voice quieter than he had ever heard it. William didn't say anything right away. William, she continued, there's something I never told you. Back then, before you left for college, before everything, he looked at her. What? She took a deep breath. I loved you back then. I just never said it because you were trying to leave and build something bigger, and I didn't want to be the reason you stayed. The words hung in the air between them, full of years they had never talked about. I didn't leave because I didn't love you, William said quietly. I left because I was afraid that if I didn't get out, I would never become anything. And I thought I would come back when I had something to offer you. Monica smiled sadly. Life doesn't wait for people to become ready. William, I know that now. He said. They sat in silence for a long time. Not uncomfortable, just honest. You're here now, Monica said finally. Yes, he replied, and Annie is starting to see you as someone who stays. I know. Monica looked at him carefully. So, I need to ask you something. And I need the truth. All right, are you here for a while? She asked. Or are you here to say goodbye again later? William looked toward the hallway where Annie was sleeping, then back at Monica. I think, he said slowly. I'm here because I don't want to say goodbye this time. Monica didn't answer right away, but she didn't look away either. Sunday night ended quietly, but the words Monica had said did not leave William's mind when he returned to his apartment. I loved you back then. He stood in his kitchen again. The city lights stretching endlessly outside the glass. But the apartment felt different now. Not peaceful, not impressive, just quiet. The kind of quiet that made a man hear his own thoughts too clearly. He loosened his tie and sat down without turning on the television. For years, this apartment had been a place where he slept between flights, between meetings, between deals. It had never really been a place where he lived. Now, for the first time, he noticed how little of his life was actually inside it. Clean counters, expensive furniture, shelves with books he hadn't opened in years, a refrigerator with more bottled water than food. He thought about Monica's small kitchen, Annie's books on the table, the sound of homework pages turning, the way Annie leaned against his arm when he read to her. He had built a life where nothing was missing except the things that couldn't be bought. On Tuesday afternoon, he called Monica. Hi, she said when she answered. Everything okay? Yes, he said. I was just wondering if you and Annie were free this weekend. We usually are, Monica said. Why? I was thinking, he said slowly. Maybe you could come see where I live. Both of you for dinner. There was a small pause on the line. William, she said carefully. We don't really belong in places like where you live. He expected that answer. You belong wherever you're invited, he said. And I'm inviting you. I don't want Annie to feel uncomfortable, Monica said. She won't, he replied. And if she does, then that's my fault, not hers. Monica was quiet for a moment. Let me ask her. He waited, listening to the faint sound of Monica calling Annie into the room, the muffled sound of their voices, then Annie's louder voice coming closer to the phone. You want us to come to your house? Annie asked. Yes, William said. For dinner. Is it very big? She asked. Yes. Do you have ducks? She asked. He smiled. No, still just traffic. Annie thought about that. Okay, we'll come anyway. Saturday evening, William found himself doing something he had never done before. He was nervous about guests coming to his home. He had asked Harold to help bring a few things earlier that day. Groceries, flowers, and a small step stool he had bought because he realized Annie wouldn't be able to reach the bathroom sink comfortably. At 6 o'clock, the doorman called upstairs. Mr. Carter, your guests are here. Guests. The word felt strange when it referred to Monica and Annie. When he opened the door, Annie stepped in first, then stopped just inside the apartment and looked around with wide eyes. The apartment was large with tall windows, soft lighting, and a view of the city that stretched for miles. Wow, Annie said quietly. You can see everything. Monica stepped in more slowly, looking around, not with excitement, but with careful observation, like someone entering a place where she was not sure of the rules. It's beautiful, she said politely. It's just an apartment, William replied. It's not just an apartment, Annie said. It's like a movie house. William laughed softly. I'll take that as a compliment. He showed Annie where the bathroom was and brought the step stool over so she could wash her hands. Monica noticed that immediately, but didn't say anything. Just looked at him for a second longer than usual. Dinner was simple pasta, salad, bread, because William had learned that simple dinners were the ones where people talked the most. Annie walked around the living room slowly, looking at the bookshelves, the piano in the corner that William rarely played anymore, the photographs on the wall, from places he had traveled. You went to all these places? She asked. Yes. Were you alone? She asked. Most of the time, he thought. But he didn't say that out loud. Most of the time, he admitted. She nodded as if that confirmed something she had been thinking about. During dinner, Annie asked 100 questions: why buildings were so tall, what he did all day, whether he ever got tired of meetings, why he didn't have any toys in his house. I think I forgot to buy toys, he said. That's okay, Annie said. You can buy some if kids come over. Monica almost choked on her water at that, and William smiled. That's a good plan, he said. After dinner, Annie stood by the window looking out at the city lights. It looks like the sky is on the ground, she said. William walked over and stood beside her. That's a very good way to describe it. She slipped her hand into his again without thinking. The way she did now. Do you like living here? She asked. He looked out at the city, then down at her small hand in his. It's a nice place, he said, but it was a little too quiet before. Annie leaned her head lightly against his arm again. It's not quiet when we're here, she said. No, he said softly. It's not. Across the room, Monica watched them standing by the window, the man she had loved when she was young, and the daughter she had raised by herself, standing side by side like they had known each other much longer than they had. She realized then that something had already happened, something none of them had officially decided, something that had grown slowly over dinners and pancakes and reading books and school nights. They had started to become a family. They just hadn't said the word out loud yet. The first time Annie called his apartment our window, William did not correct her. It happened on a Wednesday evening when Monica had a late shift and Annie had come to William's apartment after school because her after-school program had closed early. Harold had picked her up with Monica's permission. And when William came out of his office, still on a call, he found Annie sitting on the floor by the big window doing her homework on the coffee table. She looked up and waved, then pointed at the skyline. He had covered the phone and mouthed 5 minutes. And she had nodded like a patient adult. When he finally ended the call, she said, I like doing homework at our window. Our window, he repeated the phrase in his mind. Not correcting her, not explaining, just letting the words exist in the room between them. That evening, they ate takeout on the couch because William had come home late, and Annie had a spelling test the next day. Monica arrived an hour later, tired but smiling when she saw Annie already in pajamas, her homework finished, her reading book on the table. You didn't have to do all this, Monica said quietly to William while Annie brushed her teeth. I know, he replied. But I wanted to. Monica looked around the apartment at the small step stool in the bathroom, at the extra toothbrush in a cup near the sink, at the children's book now sitting on the coffee table like it had always belonged there. You're making space for her, Monica said softly. William leaned against the counter. She already made space for me. I'm just trying to keep up. A week later, something happened that changed the rhythm of things again. William was in the middle of a meeting when Rachel knocked lightly and stepped into the room. Something she only did when it was important. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said. But your phone has rung 3 times. It's Monica Hayes. William stood up immediately. Excuse me, he said to the men at the table and stepped out into the hallway to take the call. Monica, is everything okay? Her voice sounded tight, controlled in the way people sound when they are trying not to panic. Annie fell at school. They think her arm might be broken. I'm at the hospital, but they won't take her for x-rays yet because there are people ahead of us and I didn't know who else to call. I'm on my way, William said, already walking toward the elevator. You don't have to, she started. I'm on my way, he repeated and hung up. At the hospital, he found Monica sitting in a hard plastic chair. Annie beside her with her arm held carefully against her chest, trying very hard not to cry. When Annie saw him, her face changed immediately. You came, she said, her voice small but relieved. Of course I came, he said, kneeling beside her. Let me see. I tried not to cry, she said. But it hurts. You can cry if it hurts, he said gently. Being brave doesn't mean pretending nothing hurts. Monica looked at him over Annie's head, her eyes full of gratitude and exhaustion. They said it might be another hour. She said there was an accident and the emergency rooms are full. William stood up and stepped a few feet away, already taking out his phone. He made 2 calls, spoke quietly, calmly, the way he did when solving problems that required money and influence and speed. 20 minutes later, a nurse came through the door and called Annie's name. Monica looked up, surprised. They said we had to wait. The nurse smiled slightly. We have an opening now. Monica looked at William. What did you do? I asked for help, he said simply. 2 hours later, Annie had a small cast on her arm, pink, because the nurse had given her a choice and a lollipop in her good hand. It's not broken very bad, Annie said. Seriously, they said I was lucky. You were very brave, Monica told her. I was brave because you were there, Annie said. Then she looked at William. And because you came, too. They walked out of the hospital together late that night, the city quieter now, the air colder. Monica stopped on the sidewalk and looked at him. You left work in the middle of the day. Yes. You made phone calls and suddenly they took us early. Yes. You didn't even hesitate, she said. William looked at Annie, who was holding her pink cast very carefully like it was something important. When you care about someone, he said quietly, you don't schedule when to show up. You just show up. Monica's eyes filled with tears this time. And she didn't look away. William, she said, her voice unsteady. You're not acting like a friend anymore. He met her eyes. I know. They stood there on the sidewalk, Annie between them, the city lights reflecting off the windows around them. I'm acting like, he said slowly, a man who loves you. And a man who is starting to love your daughter like she's his own. Monica covered her mouth with her hand, tears finally slipping down her cheeks. You can't say things like that unless you mean them, she whispered. I know, he said. That's why I'm saying it now. Annie looked up at both of them, not understanding everything, but understanding enough to know that something important had just been said. Are you both going to cry? She asked. Monica laughed through her tears and pulled Annie close carefully so she wouldn't bump her arm. No, baby, she said. I think we're going to be okay. William looked at the two of them standing there under the street light. And for the first time in his life, the future he wanted was not a bigger company or a taller building or a more important title. It was much simpler than that. He just wanted to be the man who got the phone call when Annie was hurt and the man who was already on his way before anyone even had to ask. The pink cast became part of Annie's life for the next few weeks. And in a quiet way, it also became part of William's life. He signed it the day after she got it, writing carefully so his letters didn't look too much like a businessman's signature and more like something a child would want to keep to Annie, the bravest reader I know. William, she traced the letters with her finger after he finished. Now it's official, she said. What's official? He asked. You're on my cast, she said. That means you're important. He didn't know how to respond to that, so he just nodded and handed her the blue marker so she could draw a small heart next to his name. A few nights later, Monica asked him to stay after Annie went to bed. There was something in her voice when she said it that made him understand this was not a normal conversation. They sat at the small kitchen table, the apartment quiet, except for the faint sound of traffic outside and the occasional sound of Annie turning in her sleep in the next room. I've been thinking, Monica said, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she had forgotten to drink. About what you said. At the hospital, William didn't pretend not to understand. Okay, you said you love me, she continued. And that you're starting to love Annie like she's your own. Yes, he said. She nodded slowly as if she had replayed those words many times in her head already. I believe you, she said. That's what makes this so serious. He waited, letting her take her time. William, loving someone is not the hard part, she said quietly. Staying is the hard part. Choosing the same people over and over again. Even when life gets busy or complicated or inconvenient. That's the hard part. I know, he said. Do you? She asked gently. Because Annie doesn't just like you. She trusts you. She watches the door for you. She saves you the last piece of bread. She tells her teacher about you. You're not just a man who comes to dinner anymore. William felt the weight of every word she was saying, and he did not try to escape it. I'm not afraid of loving you, Monica continued. I'm afraid of what happens to her if you ever stop showing up. William leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the table. When I was a boy, he said, I used to think that success meant no one could ever leave you because you would be too important to leave. But that's not how life works. People leave anyway. Money doesn't stop that. Success doesn't stop that. Only character stops that. Monica looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of hesitation. I can't promise that life will never get complicated. He said, I can't promise that work will never be difficult. But I can promise you this. I will not disappear. I will not become a man who used to come to dinner. I will not be someone she has to explain in the past tense. Monica's eyes filled with tears again, but she did not look away. You're asking for a place in our life, she said. I'm asking to be part of your life, he replied. Both of you, not as a visitor, not as a guest, as someone who stays. She covered her mouth with her hand for a moment, thinking, breathing, trying to be sure she was not making a decision based on fear or loneliness, or the memory of a boy she had loved years ago. Annie already decided, Monica said softly. She decided the night you let her sit at your table. William smiled slightly. She's very decisive. Monica laughed quietly through her tears. Then she became serious again. If we do this, she said, you don't get to leave when it's hard. You don't get to disappear when work gets busy. You don't get to love us only when it's convenient. I know, he said. And you don't just become the man I love, she said. You become the man she looks up to, the man she learns from, the man she measures other people against for the rest of her life. William took a slow breath. He had negotiated contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but this was the most serious agreement anyone had ever asked him to enter. I understand, he said. Monica studied his face for a long moment, then finally nodded. Then we do this slowly, she said. But we do it for real. He reached across the table. Then, not dramatically, just quietly, and took her hand. She did not pull away. A few weeks later, on a Sunday afternoon, they went to the park again. Annie's cast was scheduled to come off soon, and she was already talking about learning to ride a bike like she had planned. They sat on the same bench near the pond where the ducks gathered, the same place where Annie had once leaned against his arm like she had known him forever. Annie looked at the two of them and said, my teacher said families are the people who show up for you. That's a very smart teacher. William said. Annie nodded. So, I was thinking. I think we're a family. Monica looked at William, her eyes soft but steady. William looked at Annie, then at Monica, then back at Annie. I think, he said slowly. You might be right. Annie smiled, satisfied, and leaned against his side again, her head resting comfortably against his arm like it had many times before. The ducks moved across the water, the city moved in the distance, and people walked past without knowing that on a simple park bench, three lives had come together in a way none of them had planned. The night a little girl walked into a restaurant and asked a stranger a simple question. Can I sit here until my mom comes? William looked out over the water, then down at Annie, then at Monica. All his life, he had been a man who built things, companies, buildings, deals, a name, a reputation. But this, he realized, sitting on that bench with Monica's hand in his, and Annie leaning against his shoulder, was the most important thing he would ever build. A place where no one had to ask for a chair because they already belonged at the table. This story carries a quiet but powerful lesson. Success in life is not measured by money, titles, or how high you climb, but by who sits at your table and who would notice if you didn't come home. The little girl did not ask the billionaire for money or gifts. She only asked for a place to sit. But through that small act of kindness, the man was reminded of something he had lost while chasing success, connection, family, and the simple responsibility of showing up for someone who trusts you. The story teaches that real love is not in grand words, but in consistency in the people who stay, who return, who answer the phone, who show up to the school event, who sit beside you in the hospital. In the end, the greatest thing a person can build is not a company, but a home in someone else's life where they no longer have to ask, can I sit here? Because they already belong. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration.